On today's episode of Locked On Wild, I think the most notable thing about January for the Wild is that it's over. Will February hold the same harshness, or will the Wild benefit from a little bit of a break?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Zach Zeman joins us as we recap the month of January, which saw more than a few struggles for the Minnesota Wild. We'll take a look ahead to February to see if the Wild will have better luck throughout a short month of February. And we'll also hand out some accolades as well with the Locked On Wild Player of the Month for January. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild. As mentioned, Zach Zeman joins us. And Zach, as I teased in the open, Minnesota Wild went 8-6 in the month of January. Lots of injuries. And I think we were all kind of expecting that there'd be a little step back in performance with the players that were out of the lineup. But I think the thing that is kind of leaving the month on a sour note is that by and large, the losses were non-competitive. You have the 6-0 loss to Ottawa to, well, technically start off the month of February, but still, you got the 6-1 loss to the Colorado Avalanche. That was a just atrocity of a game. Oh. You have the Nashville Predators game where the Wilds spent more of their time trying to draw even with Zachary Leroux than playing the game. You have a 4-0 shutout loss to the Utah Hockey Club. You have the Yucko game against the Calgary Flames. I don't even remember that 5-4 loss to the Calgary Flames, even though it was like a week and a half ago.
It was bad.
Just some yucko performances coupled in with some pretty good wins throughout the month. Obviously, at the start of the month, you beat Washington and Carolina back-to-back on the road. Can't take that one away, but just kind of a, up and down month of January.
Yeah, I mean, walking into the month of January, the whole thing about this Wild team was that they can stay in these games and not let them run away. But now we're starting to see exhibits of 6-1 losses, 6-0 losses, like in these games, a 6-2 loss to Nashville. Even, this team is starting to, kind of like bask in the roughness in a little bit, and it's just a little bit different about how they started the year. And to be honest, January started off really well. I mean, you were starting to see the roller coaster of wins go. A win over Washington, a win over Carolina, you're still going upwards, a win against St. Louis. And then you start to drop and go all over the place with player news, a lot of off-ice stuff, injury reports. It's just a complete fiasco. And you starting to lose games. And it's, a couple of them got out of hand, but yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of the Wild come back down to earth a little bit. Yeah.
And it's funny because you still have those glimpses. Like they beat Toronto on the road 3-1. Quality win. They beat Montreal on the road. I know Montreal is middling, but they're still technically in the playoff push in the East. And it's still like they still have good enough offensive pieces, and the Wild did a really good job of shutting them down. We know the issues at this point. We know what is causing a lot of the problems. It's defensive lapses and lack of secondary scoring. Like you You just can't be a one-line team and expect to consistently win games in the NHL. And until a second line emerges from the weeds and you can say, poof, here's a second line that can give us some goals. Until that happens, this is going to be what you get is the teams that are below you in the standings. You can beat them pretty regularly. The teams at or above you, it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, even the Kirill Kaprizov news where he comes back, plays through that injury clearly, and it still doesn't have a factor or an impact on how this team does on the ice. And you start to realize that, okay, we're still kicking it in gear with him off the ice, but when he comes back into the roster, you just kind of like let it go. It just seems it was a little more dull even with him back in the lineup, which is what the whole mentality of this team was. Like, we can persevere through these games without our best player, but when he comes back, we kind of just let our foot off the gas. And so he gets it back off the ice, LTIR stuff, and you're still not really clicking again. So there's still some issues. Obviously Kirill's generational and he can change it, but you can't just rely on that one player. And clearly, even when he was back, a lot of it wasn't changing.
And it's just so weird too, because you look at the key wins of the month, Washington and Carolina to start it, but the Wild beat Colorado 3-1 on the road on the 20th of January. And I don't think the 3-1 score does it justice in the fact that the Avalanche only had 11 shots on goal through the first two periods.
Yeah, I was there in person. It might have been the quietest arena I've heard in a very long time. That Avalanche team is desperate right now. They're currently behind the Wild 2 points in the standings. They need to beat the Minnesota Wild to advance up in the Central Division standings. And when you can't do that at home, and you let the Wild, who came off probably the worst loss of the season in Nashville, 6-2, letting the game run away from them, fighting people they don't need to. Obviously, it's just all this past stuff coming back to them there. But you can't beat the Wild after that loss. It's kind of tough. And it was a good bounce back game for the Minnesota Wild. It was a good win. I mean, you kind of just start to see Fleury blossom in his natural habitat and in an away environment when he needed him the most. Absolutely stuffing the Avalanche, shutting them down. It was very cool to see. Very quiet atmosphere for sure.
Nice. That's what we always like. Now, before we get to anointing the player of the month, I just want to kind of recap the January stats. The Wild's 8-6 for the month. They had 41 goals scored. They gave up 42. Power play was at 22.6 somehow. I don't believe that number. And the penalty kills at 71.4%. Now, let's get to the task at hand with the player of the month for the month of January. And I think we're going to go four nominees for January. Matt Boldy, Matt Zuccarello, and Marco Rossi all tied with 14 points in 14 January games. So we're gonna throw them into the hopper as the three nominees on the offensive side. Marc-Andre Fleury went 5-2 with a 2.26 goals against average and a 923 save percentage in net. So those are your four nominees for player of the month for January. I'll let you cast the first vote, Zach. If you were picking somebody for player of the month for January, who would it be?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking of like moments in January and what comes to my head the most, what player had that goal, had that game. And honestly, it comes down to that game, the last one of the month against Montreal and Marc-Andre Fleury. What a scene, shutting out the Montreal Canadiens in his home province. It's just, storybook ending for him there. That's the only thing that I really like. Oh my gosh, that was historic and great for this team. Everyone surrounding him, the league just posting about it. Like, it was a really, really cool. The Montreal Canadiens staying on the ice. I'm going with Marc-Andre Fleury. Just because I saw it in person too, just a dominant performance in Colorado, but you realize that he's still a backup goalie. And when you're able to still come out with these like huge wins, when, you're kind of just thrown into these scenarios, like, and you go 5-2, like that's tremendous. Gus probably didn't have the best month of his career, obviously. And so, you kind of just have to rely on Fleury. He came up clutch, and that's really what stuck out to me the most. I'm going with Marc-Andre Fleury.
I like that because I'm going to echo it. That game against Colorado is one of the highlight wins of the season. It's an Avalanche team that is just lethal offensively. And again, 11 shots on goal through the first 2 periods. And then you survive the onslaught at the end, and Fleury just shuts them down. So it's a pretty easy choice, honestly, for me. I know you've got the 3 guys at the top that were a point per game for the month of March or from the month of January, but Fleury's still, especially with Gustafson's numbers starting to Fleury being able to stabilize the net, that wins it for me. So
that's huge.
It's a pretty easy choice. Congratulations to Marc-Andre Fleury for being named the Locked On Wild Player of the Month for January. We'll talk at the end of the show today about who may take February's honors. We have a shorter schedule here in the month of February, and obviously it's underway with 1 game in the books, but we still have a few games to discuss here for the rest of the month, and so we will dive into the rest of the February schedule as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. For those that are curious, the Kansas City Chiefs are 1.5-point favorites heading into the matchup on Sunday. So keep that in mind. We'll see if that line changes at all here over the final few days of the week ahead of Sunday. So bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we will be with you after the game for a Locked On Wild postcast. So join us. Hopefully it's not a drubbing again so that I have to cancel the postcast because I'm just beyond disgusted with what we see. But as long as it is win or lose, as long as it's a competitive game, we got you after the game is done here tonight. And coming up for you on Thursday, we've got our next live show in pregame, a pregame for the Carolina Hurricanes game. Looks like I thought that game started at 7. Looks like it starts at 6:30. So we'll go 5:30 for the full hour pregame to get you set up for the matchup here against the Hurricanes. So that's coming up here the rest of the week as well. Zach, let's take a look at the February schedule. And we already have 1 game in the books. Ottawa Senators. That was a 6-0 loss on the road. Hideous game.
Oh.
We don't need to go into any further detail on that because I put out one of the more fiery episodes of the season on Sunday. And so if you're looking for some reaction as to what happened in that game, go check that out. By the way, Ryan Hartman, 10-game suspension. Look, repeat offender. You don't get any benefit of the doubt from the league. If you're a repeat offender, they're going to throw the book at you. It sounds like Hartman's going to potentially appeal it, but I mean, there's really nothing to say. Like,
yeah, it's tough. It's unacceptable, and there's really no excuse for it. It's just forfeiting $500,000 of salary it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's no short amount of change. So it's a situation where it's like, look, you did what you did, and now you face the consequences.
Absolutely.
It's about all we'll say for it. So we've got tonight's game against the Boston Bruins, and it's a Boston team that there's really no other way to put this. They're just having a year. They have fought their way back to being in much better position than they were at the beginning of the season. But as of right now, they are outside the playoff picture looking in. They're 1 point behind the Columbus Blue Jackets. But it's a Bruins team that is 7-8-3 at home. So they win all of their home games. The Minnesota Wild are a good team on the road. So that should be an interesting game to start it out. But it feels like this one could get trippy too because it's Boston.
Yeah, there's one player I'm looking at right now. It's Matt Boldy. He was clearly one of the stat leaders of the month of January, and he's back in his hometown of Boston. He always plays well there. I feel like we've always seen a couple of good highlights from the last previous years. But this tonight, when we're recording this podcast against Boston is a huge game. It's a big bounce back opportunity. Currently haven't scored a single goal in the month of February. So that's not a good stat to read, but we know obviously you lose 6-0. You're not going to score against the Senators. This is a good bounce back game. More importantly, if we look back at the month of January, the Minnesota Wild's home record was 1-4, and they had 5 home games. They won 1. And so if you get a chance to stun the Bruins, walk in there after that terrible loss in Ottawa, you go home and you host the Hurricanes and Islanders before the break. If you go here to Boston tonight and take that win, you finally have a chance to reinvent yourself at home right before. I'm calling it like the NFL bye week. I feel like that's a good, correlation.
I like that.
You get a lot of time off, but if you can win, these last 3 games heading into the break without Ryan Hartman, I think you do have a shot at this month being really successful. Those 2 home games are just so big. You just got to beat Carolina. You haven't given up a goal to them yet. They beat them 4-0 on the 4th of January. So if you can repeat that at home again, my goodness, then it's a whole new conversation. But yeah, there's a lot of good games coming up early here.
You mentioned that Carolina game, and I was looking forward to when I heard the news that Mikko Rantanen got traded. I'm like, oh, thank God we don't have to deal with him as a member of the Avalanche anymore. And then I saw that it was to Carolina, and I was like, oh, great, we still play them. So that'll be interesting to see how he fits in that lineup. And as far as I know, that Carolina team, they're in second place in the Metropolitan. They're very tough out. They're pedestrian on the road though. 12-11-3. And what do we say, everydayers? 12-11-3 equals 12-14 because overtime losses are losses with points. So just wanted to get that in every chance I get. It's from what I have heard, it's starting that's starting to pick up steam in other shows, which I like, which means people are listening. So thank you for tuning in. After that, it's the New York Islanders on Saturday. And again, the New York Islanders, Zach, they're 4 points out of a playoff spot right now. They are 12-10-5 on the road. They are a weird team. The Islanders are a weird old team that caught fire for a while, but they're still 24-21-7. They're still 24-28 on the season. So this is a game you should win too.
That's the most winnable game of the month that I'm currently looking at. You got to beat the Islanders. Can't let a team like that come in. These games mean so much. And of course, it's against an Eastern Conference team, but still, you got to just finish these games at home. You have to just get away from that stigma that you can't win games at home. Like they've been booed out of the arena like 4 times, especially last month. It's got to change. I think that's a huge, talking point in the locker room coming back home. It's got to change, and why not start against Carolina and the Islanders? Why not?
I mean, that's all I'm saying, because after that, so you got Boston, Carolina, New York. You play the Detroit Red Wings twice. I hate home and homes.
Mm-hmm.
Despise home and homes. Unless you're going to do, if you're going to do them, you do them on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and both teams have the travel day on a Wednesday. The Wild will play Detroit on Saturday, and then they will host Detroit on Tuesday. The Saturday game is at 11:30 a.m. on the 22nd after the Four Nations face-off.
What in the world?
Like I said, I hate home and homes. I don't know if there's anything that I hate less. To go full old man yells at cloud here. I don't know if there's anything I hate less.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Red Wings schedule, and they actually do play the Anaheim Ducks on Sunday, the February 23rd. So in between the Wild having those 2 days off, the Red Wings still have a game against Anaheim, which is even more odd. I don't know. It's just like, I don't know. It's so weird. I think there's been a lot of weird home and homes this year.
Yeah.
I feel like Vegas always does them. That's just like the first team that comes up to my head.
The Wild have another one against the New Jersey Devils coming up in March to end the month of March. So they have 1, 2. Where are the other ones on the schedule? I know there are at least a couple more. Or maybe not.
Yeah.
No, the thing that has been weird about this schedule is it's not even the home and homes. It's just been you play a team like twice in a 3-game span. I don't like that.
Or you go to Detroit after the Four Nations, and then you host Detroit, but then you go back to Utah and Colorado after just having a random home game against Detroit.
Yeah. Why could you not host Detroit to come out of the break and then go at Detroit, at Utah, at Colorado?
Yeah, let the Road Warriors shine. Why can't every game be on the road?
Can we just think out some of these schedule things? That's all I'm asking, is to just use even a little bit of common sense. But anyway, Detroit, you play twice. Detroit has currently won 6 games in a row. They're wild card 1 in the East. They have Patrick Kane on their roster, who always enjoys playing the Minnesota Wild. So those will be tough. And Detroit recently has had some pretty good success against the Minnesota Wild. Last year, remember, was the last game that Dean Evison ever coached as a member of the Minnesota Wild, was against the Detroit Red Wings. So yeah, that's all fun. You finish the month then with Utah and Colorado on the road. So I think you're right, Zach. I think the New York Islanders game on Saturday is probably especially with Matt Barzal out for the Islanders for a long while. That is probably the most winnable game of the month for this Wild team.
And of course you end the month with a back-to-back against Utah, who's pretty decent. They've had the Wild's number, I believe. I think 2-1 against the Minnesota Wild this year. And then you go back to Colorado, and hopefully Fleury starts that one again, because my goodness, if we can have another game like that, I would go nuts. And that's probably what the Wild deserve, is a little revenge tour or told you so game back in Denver. Utah, man, I keep circling them on my calendar. They are so annoyingly good, but you never hear about them. You never see what's going on in Utah other than the name change, the copyright stuff, and then the jerseys. That's all I see. But they're actually a really good team on the ice. And the Wild just sent over, got some future considerations back from them. So it's just, I don't know. It's
for
been
Mr. Sammy Walker, who Alex was saying, the Utah Hockey Club farm system is in Arizona. So Sammy Walker technically going to Arizona, even though he's property of the Utah Hockey Club. Who knows?
There's a lot going on.
I just would like to point out the Colorado Avalanche do not play a back-to-back in that matchup against the Wild on Friday. They play Wednesday, then they're off Thursday, and they host the Wild on Friday. Wild have the back-to-back, so that's just cool. Cool.
It's gonna be tough. Hopefully the Four Nations thing goes well. I'm just praying that the Wild don't have anything coming out of that on the negative side. Brodin coming back tonight, and hopefully he doesn't re-aggravate or hurt himself even more. That's literally my biggest concern for this month, is that Four Nations face off, and hopefully the Wild just can get back on the right track. It's been a frustrating last couple of months. This team hasn't been their full team in so long, and I think we deserve that as fans, but also just to relax a little bit. It's been a heck of a last couple of months for sure.
Why don't we do this? We'll sneak in one final break. We'll talk a little bit about just the Four Nations, because obviously there are a couple of Wild players that are involved, but I think the thing that a lot of Wild fans are looking forward to is just a break. So we'll talk about that. We'll also give our predictions for how we think the month will go. 8 games in the month of February, so it's a short prediction, but we'll get to that as well as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. All right, Zach, before we get to a little Four Nations here, 8 games in the month of February. I'm going to put the over-under. This is the lowest bar that I've set this season. I'm putting the over-under for the month of February at 3.5 for wins, because I feel like 3-5 is a very realistic scenario for this month.
Yeah, it's going to be such an interesting month, because it all depends on how this team looks after the Four Nations break. Yeah. In my head, I was just predicting what you were going to say for the line, and I was thinking 4.5. So I'm a little more optimistic, but I totally understand at 3.5. I'm pretty optimistic about the Boston Bruins game. There's something about it that I just feel like this Wild team is hungry after that loss in Ottawa, that something's going to happen. They're going to bounce back. That's just my biggest hope. Yeah. If that happens, then I can give you some leeway on losing to Carolina, which is all right. And then you beat the Islanders, you take one from the Red Wings, and you hopefully take one against the Avs / Utah back-to-back.
Yeah, that's you're spot on. Like it feels like if you can finish this road trip off with a win against the Bruins to go to 4-1 on that trip, if you split the home games between Carolina and New York, you split between Detroit and Detroit, and you split between Utah and Colorado, you just gotta chop it into little bite-sized pieces. Like this month ordering.
Is so...
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I'm ordering sushi. I'm just doing little bite-sized pieces for the month.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what this month is. It's like the games are all spaced differently. You're traveling half the time. You're coming home for one, and then you're going back out again. It's a lot. All of these players are going different play. Like, there's a lot of Wild players in the Four Nations face off. We'll get to that later. But I'm just saying, like, yeah, if you could just take one every other game, that's totally fine. This is not going to make or break your schedule or your season, I mean. So, yeah, I mean, I'm more looking forward to the month of March than this one. But, if you got to pick up some quality wins here, prove that you're okay after the break, too.
Yeah, and let's get right into it. So you've got the break between the 8th and the 22nd because of the Four Nations face-off, and the Minnesota Wild have Brock Faber, Matt Boldy, Jonas Brodin, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Philip Gustafsson representing the team on their respective nations. Zach, are you going to be tuning in? Because the whole thing behind this is that this is taking the place of the All-Star game this year, which, look, the All-Star game is, at this point, it is being basically kept alive for sponsors. The opportunity to, like, meet and greet the players. Yeah. it's a glorified exhibition. I think these will at least be. I think these will be games that the players, at least, it sounds like they're pretty amped up to go toe to toe against each other. So I think the games will be better. It's weird that it's going on during the season, and now you have like this like week and a half off. Honestly, I think what you do is you have a first half and a second half. You have a week off in between so that everybody can go do whatever they want to kind of recoup and rest and recover. You do first half all-stars. You announce them. You do like your first team all-star, second team all-star. You don't have to do a game. I don't give two rips if you do a game.
Yeah.
And then you start the second half and you just start full bore to the end of the season. And then you do the same thing. You do second half all-stars, first team, second team. I feel like it would be more valuable to have a literal break, because that's what it's called, the all-star break. Like, it'd be more beneficial to have a break than it would to have a game. Like, get rid of the game and just have some time off.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the NHL All-Star game is barely competitive at all. You don't see any players giving anything in that 3v3 tournament. It's almost kind of a joke. The games are like 15-12, and it's just like, oh, great, he scored. And then like the MVP finishes with like 30 goals, 12 assists, and then gets a car. Okay, and then you wrap it up. I'm really like intrigued. I don't think I'm like excited. I'm just intrigued to see how it's gonna look. You see the Wild have a ton of players, which is really, really cool. We have a really diverse country background team, and I think that's very cool that we have several players going to their respective country to play for them. I'm just hoping that brings a sense of competitiveness, but I also don't want it to be too competitive because I'm so nervous about the state of this hockey team right now. I just really, really hope no one gets injured, which is like kind of saying you could say the same thing for every single team in the league, which then would bring the competitive level down. So I'm just hoping that it's competitive enough to where it's like, okay, like a 3-3 game, type of thing. Hopefully it's not like, I don't know. I think there's going to be a level of competitiveness that we haven't seen in a very long time.
I hope so, because you look at the box score and it's like, and Team Finland beat Team Canada 12-11. It's like,
it's like, why are our players even risking playing for nothing?
Look, I get it. Jordan Binnington is one of the starting goalies for Canada, but come on, there's a limit to the number of goals that you give up in a game. Come on.
Yeah.
All kidding aside, it's Connor Hellebuyck everybody's going to be gunning to try to score on Connor Hellebuyck. That's going to be the big storyline from this tournament, especially Team Canada, and we'll see who wins whatever the prize is. I'm sure there's a prize. The Four Nations Cup, I don't know.
Yeah, but I hope nobody on this Wild roster gets anything close to any injury, and I hope no one gets injured at all. But then the more I say that, like the more I think no one's gonna try. Hopefully it's entertaining. That's all.
I think you're onto something though. Is there is just this kind of implication that if the games aren't like actual NHL games, that maybe the players aren't going to go 100%. We'll see. I am just bracing for the like report after the tournament to say, and the Minnesota Wild are the only team that suffered an injury during the tournament. And I'll be like,
yeah, like if you're Jonas Brodin right now and you're coming back off LTIR tonight against the Boston Bruins and you're scheduled to play in this tournament, what is going through your mind right now? That might be the hardest decision of all time for, like, I swear. If I was in his shoes, I don't even think I would want to go. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, I guess we'll
there's
see.
A lot to it.
I guess we'll see what happens. We will, of course, keep you up to date. And that does it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. So again, make sure to join us after the game tonight for another Locked on Wild postcast. Make sure to hit the like button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week, because Locked On Wild has you covered every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. See ya.